Happy Halloween and welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho and these are my running back rankings for Week 9. All right, we're here. Have you ever seen Reggae Shark?
Reggae Shark got no political agenda. Reggae Shark, he just wants redemption. Reggae Shark, and he also wants ganja.
That was the main inspiration for this costume, but we are a shark for Halloween this year. This costume is dope, but like if you go full costume, your hands are like totally tied. But there's the fin, and there's the side profile. All right, time for the video. I got super high off of that original intro. I don't know how much of it I kept. I'm not so sure. But let's get going with today's video. I mentioned it this week and last. I'm going to be messing with the schedule, and I'm going to try something out before we hit the double-digit weeks late November and December. So I'm trying out a new video today. We're going to combine wide receivers and running backs and rank the flex position in today's video. We're going to go 100 players deep. Who is a lock in your lineup? Who is probably in your lineup, and then if you're in a jam, who you might look to piece it together, and then who is definitely out of the question, not in your lineup. So let us begin. We're going to start at running back with a bit of an injury report. And the biggest piece of news I did mention on a previous video today, I hope you picked up Kyle Monangai, because DeAndre Swift is out with that groin injury. Did not practice at all. The matchup against the Bengals is the best on the week. Monangai is going off. There's also an injury to Ramondre Stevenson. So TreVeyon Henderson finally might get all of the touches. The breakout we've been hoping for might happen on Sunday against the Falcons. Antonio Gibson is also on IR. So TreVeyon with a big upgrade. Josh Jacobs is questionable, but I'm assuming he plays, not too concerned about it. He was limited in practice this week, however. And then Isaiah Pacheco already ruled out this week. And that is a big upgrade for Kareem Hunt. And I also think Brashard Smith has legit flex appeal in this matchup against the Bills. Alvin Kamara was limited all week in practice, but is expected to play. Same for Woody Marks. He was limited on Thursday, but I do assume he'll suit up. And then Algier, also limited this week, but I do expect Algier on the field. But lastly, an interesting scenario going on in Arizona. Trey Benson is still on IR, but over the bye week, Michael Carter was cut from the team and then signed to their practice squad. And with Emari Demercado's lack of favor in the building, I would assume Bam Knight has this backfield all to himself against the Cowboys in a great matchup. So love Bam Knight this week. If he's available, that's also a very, very good pickup off the wire. Let us talk about the matchups, though there are some that are significantly better than others. Let's start with running backs. These are all of the statistics for every defense, how many points they're giving up to the position. In blue, it's season-long stats, but then in red, it's more recently the last 4 games and how vulnerable they are in just the month of October. At this point, we can kind of write off September a little bit, but it does factor in overall. So best matchup this week goes to Kyle Monangai. Mentioned it, the Bengals are trash on defense. So many points available, by far the most, more than 30 in the last 4 games for opposing running backs. So Monangai's going off. He's a must start this week. And then I also think Kimani Vidal is a must start as well. The Titans have allowed the most running back touchdowns overall to the position, 14 total in 8 games. No other team is better than that. A touchdown feels guaranteed for Kimani Vidal. Bam Knight also gets a top 3 matchup. Mentioned him with no real competition behind him, especially if Carter isn't on the active roster. I would 100% endorse Bam Knight this week. A must start against the Cowboys, who do rank as the second best matchup in just the last month. 27.4 up from 25 on the season. Achane had a good matchup. You definitely started him. The Bills have been a top 5 matchup and also looking even better in their last 5 games, up to 26 plus points. So with no Pacheco, Kareem Hunt can probably score another touchdown, and then Brashard Smith will definitely catch some passes and get some work alongside Kareem Hunt, who's pretty old and is mainly just a short yardage goal line option. At least that's been his role up to this point this year. So love the two Chiefs running backs this week. I think very legit plays. And then Derrick Henry did have a good matchup against Miami. He put up the yardage, but no touchdown. Christian McCaffrey also gets a top 7 matchup. You know you're starting him. Chase Brown gets an upgrade, but Chicago has started to get a little more difficult since the bye. It's trending a little more downwards, but still on the season, over 20 points per game allowed by Chicago. Philadelphia's top 10, but they're on bye. And then the Niners ranked top 10 as well. With no Cam Scatterbo, I would be upgrading Tyrone Tracy. The Niners give up a lot of receptions to the position, and especially since Fred Warner and Nick Bosa have gone down, these stats are trending up. They're even higher in the top 10 if you only look at the last 4 games. But next up, the final significant upgrade would be Atlanta, who's also reeling in that department lately. The Falcons should be a very good spot for TreVeyon Henderson. They've been good elsewhere on defense, but against the run, they're having some problems. So love TreVeyon this week. With no Ramondre, he gets a significant upgrade. I would be starting TreVeyon Henderson. Then there's an average tier with a lot of teams on bye. In the next 4, there's 2 of them, the Jets and Buccaneers are on bye. And then there's neutral matchups here for Javonte Williams against Arizona, Kyren Williams against the Saints, Charbonnet and Walker against Washington. That's also pretty neutral. ETN, pretty neutral. And then Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears in kind of a hard matchup to predict. Overall, in the last month, the Chargers have been a great matchup, but if you only look at the Vikings game, they were stout as fuck. Nothing got going on the ground by the Vikings the last time we saw them. But Wentz was really banged up. It was kind of obvious to stack the Bucs. I suppose maybe you might not count that Vikings game. But then some other average matchups for Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, their locks in your lineup, Gibbs and Montgomery. It stays neutral for them. And then Woody Marks and Nick Chubb get a slightly difficult matchup against Denver. Now is where I'm starting to fade some players. Woody and Chubb are going to have a harder time than last week against San Francisco, but J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey in the same game. This should be a very defensive battle. I'm not expecting any touchdowns in this Broncos-Texans game. A lot of defense for the most part. But JCM and McNichols against Seattle, that's really a tough matchup. It's very hard to run the ball against Seattle. If you don't catch passes, you're kind of screwed against the Seahawks. But Indianapolis, also a tough spot for Warren and Gainwell. Not many touchdowns available against them. And then James Cook gets, in the last month, the most difficult matchup you can find. The Chiefs are down to 10.1 points per game in just their last 4. So I'm still going to start James Cook, but on paper, he does get a legit downgrade. Last week, though, it didn't matter against Carolina. Jacksonville, a bad matchup for Ashton Genty, but his volume probably covers the bases. And then Bijan, despite a terrible game last week in a rough matchup, I'm still going to start no matter what against the Patriots. These last 4 are the biggest downgrades possible, though. Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason against Detroit. This is a really tough spot. Very few touchdowns available against the Lions. So no thanks with them. Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle splitting touches against the Packers. Not a good spot at all. The Packers secondary is where you can exploit them, not on the ground. Alvin Kamara gets a bottom 2 matchup, and he's been really bad this season, so not expecting much from him. He's also questionable at the moment. And then thankfully we catch a break with Cleveland, who is on bye, not a factor this week. So those are the running back matchups. Now I would like to run through the wide receiver matchups. This chart shows you the exact same statistics. The only difference is that it's geared towards the wide receiver position instead of running back. So the best matchup overall at wide receiver would be Dallas. The Cowboys on the year are really vulnerable. They're getting a little bit better lately, but still a big upgrade. Marvin Harrison Jr. should be a lock in the lineup this week against the Cowboys. Next best matchup is Baltimore, who did give some value to Jaylen Waddle, but have gotten better since the bye week and did not give up a touchdown last night on Thursday. The third best matchup is Tennessee, so that goes to Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, and Quentin Johnston this week. I don't know if I trust QJ, but Justin Herbert should torch them, and Ladd and Keenan should have a great game. So start those 2. The Colts is also a really good matchup all season long. DK Metcalf with a significant upgrade. Not sure I trust Calvin Austin or Roman Wilson, but DK Metcalf going to have a good game against the Colts. Las Vegas has been a good spot this year, so Brian Thomas Jr., if he's healthy, should play well. With no Travis Hunter, Parker Washington, and De'Ami Brown, also get a boost in value. The Lions have been a good matchup this year, but they are probably getting healthier off the bye week. And then with J.J. McCarthy, I don't know if I fully trust both Jefferson and Addison, but on paper, the Lions shouldn't scare you very much. The Steelers matchup has been fantastic lately. They rank top 3 over the last month. So Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, and Alec Pierce get an upgrade. And then Jacksonville has also been really vulnerable. We saw Matthew Stafford torch them, so Trey Tucker and Jacoby Myers are a little more tempting. The Giants also really good matchup lately, so Juwan Jennings and Kendrick Bourne are looking like better options. The Commanders also good matchup this year. JSN is matchup proof, but Cooper Kupp and Torrey Horton would get an upgrade. Kupp, though, is dealing with an injury. The next few are still positive, but a bit more neutral. There's a significant tier break dropping from 30 points down to 27.5. So the Chicago Bears getting a bit tougher lately. JaMarr Chase and T. Higgins, a neutral matchup for them. The Rams, also a neutral matchup here for Olave and Shaheed. They got a new cornerback, but the main concern here is what will Tyler Shuck offer to the offense? That's kind of a red flag. The Green Bay Packers have actually been elite in terms of matchups over the last month, but on the year, a decent upgrade. So Tet McMillan, Xavier Legette, and Jalen Coker should play well. And then San Francisco is the second best matchup in the last month. Given their injuries, that's not a big shock. The Niners should have a hard time stopping WanDale Robinson and Darius Slayton. Jackson Dart should have a good game. 3 of the next 4, though, are on bye. We have the Browns and Tampa Bay on bye. Then there's Seattle. So Deebo Samuel, Jalen Lane, and Luke McCaffrey might have value, but with no Terry, it's hard to know exactly who to start there other than Deebo. And then the Eagles, also in neutral territory, are on bye as well. Same with the Jets. This middle zone, most of them are on bye. But back to Seattle real quick. They've been banged up, and then that Baker Mayfield game also really skews the numbers. In general, I am usually fading wide receivers against the Seahawks. But then these last 12 matchups are pretty difficult. We have the Bengals matchup for Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. They're terrible at stopping running backs and tight ends, so oftentimes game script just goes elsewhere. And then Buffalo is somewhat difficult for Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy. Maybe things change, but with Mahomes, I'm definitely trusting Rashee Rice. The Patriots, also a tough spot, especially with Christian Gonzalez is the top corner. Drake London is healthy, but Darnell Mooney probably gets a downgrade as well. The Saints are bad elsewhere, so Puka and Adams get a neutral matchup. I don't really care if it's a downgrade at all. I trust Stafford with Puka and Adams. You're always going to start them. Then the Vikings are somewhat difficult for Amon-Ra and J-Mo. I don't trust J-Mo, but Amon-Ra is a lock in the lineup. Arizona has a legit cornerback room, but with CeeDee Lamb and Pickens, I kind of don't care. It's still not going to change my opinion. And then these last ones, these are the much more difficult matchups. These are the ones I'm actually more so concerned about. And I would be fading the opponents a little bit more. But the Falcons against Stefon Diggs and Kayshon Boutte, Drake May kind of looks matchup proof, so still probably going to trust them. But Chimeri, DK, Ayamanor, and Van Jefferson in a very tough matchup. I don't think the volume covers them against the Chargers. Not going to trust them, even despite no Calvin Ridley. The Chiefs have been a very tough matchup, the third most difficult in the last month and bottom 5 on the season. So Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman don't feel anywhere near as safe against Kansas City. But Carolina, also a sneaky tough defense. So Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, and Matthew Golden get a downgrade. Houston, one of the toughest defenses in the league, especially in the last month. The stats are down to 16.8 points, so not excited to start Courtland Sutton or Troy Franklin. Marvin Mims is out, though, with a concussion. Maybe there's a deep shot down the field available for Troy Franklin. Miami was a tough matchup for Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, but they had a decent floor game. And then lastly, Denver might not be as difficult this week because Pat Surtain is doubtful with his ankle injury. Not expecting him to play, and Nico is cleared from the concussion protocol, so Nico should probably be fine. And then Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins, not going to be as valuable now that Christian Kirk is back on the field. He is active for this game. So those are all of the matchups to mention at wide receiver. But before I get going, I just want to give you an injury update for the position. Drake London will play. He was full in practice on Friday. He is good to go. So will Ladd McConkey. He was limited earlier in the week, but is active as well. And same for Rome Odunze in Chicago. Missed practice on Wednesday, but full on Friday, he will suit up. Same with DJ Moore in Chicago. He didn't practice Wednesday either. Friday, he was full. He will suit up. However, Luther Burden is out with a concussion. Maybe there's an extra shot down the field without Luther Burden. In Jacksonville, Travis Hunter is going on IR, out with a non-contact leg injury. So that's an upgrade for Parker Washington and De'Ami Brown. And it might be even more significant for them because Brian Thomas Jr. is questionable and has been limited in practice all week, wearing a harness in practice for his right shoulder. Not a good sign for him to be practicing with a harness, but he's kind of had the yips. I feel like he's afraid of contact. I have some concerns on BTJ, but I assume he will play. I assume he'll be active off the bye if he's practicing, at least in limited capacity. But in Washington, Terry McLaurin was ruled out. Deebo Samuel gets an upgrade, but his heel injury has been impacting him. Daniels will play, so maybe Jalen Lane, Chris Moore, and Luke McCaffrey have a bit of value, but in general, I'm only trusting Deebo Samuel. Ricky Pearsall remains out, didn't practice at all this week. Rashid Shaheed was limited, but I assume he'll be active. Calvin Ridley remains out again, and Jaden Reed stays on IR for yet another week. Still not eligible to practice. Christian Watson was limited all through the week, but is expected to play. Marvin Mims is out with a concussion, and Brandon Ayuk is staying on IR in San Francisco. But lastly, some updates in Seattle that are relevant. Cooper Kupp was full on Wednesday, but then on Thursday was downgraded to limited with a hamstring injury. And then from what I've read, I'm not really sure if he practiced at all on Friday. At worst, he was still limited, and he's now a game time decision for Sunday Night Football. So that opens the door for rookie Torrey Horton. Rookie wide receivers usually play better after the bye anyways, and a second half breakout might be looming for the rookie Torrey Horton. So I think he's an interesting stash. If Kupp misses time, I could see Torrey Horton break out as the year goes on. But that's it for the injury updates at the position. Now let's get to my flex rankings. Overall, we're ranking both running backs and wide receivers. And I'm just going to show you the top 10 on the screen here. I can't think of an argument to be benching any of these players. I have the top 4 running backs: Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, and Jahmyr Gibbs in the top 10, and the top 6 wide receivers: Rashee Rice, CeeDee Lamb, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra, JSN, and JaMarr Chase. At the top, I'd rather start the top 3 running backs. I still think those guys are the best of the best. Highest floor ceiling combo you can find. But I would rather go with the top 3 wide receivers than Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs still factors in with Dave Montgomery and occasionally does get vultured. That is the only cap for upside with Gibbs. So I trust the touchdowns for Rashee Rice. He has 3 in his 2 games this season. In the last 2 weeks, Rashee Rice is the wide receiver 1. CeeDee Lamb is healthy now against Arizona. I've hyped up the rookie cornerback Will Johnson in the past, but not against CeeDee Lamb. He's matchup proof. And then Puka is coming back from an injury, but is fully healthy, is good to go. Puka could be the number 1 play overall. So all these guys are no-brainers. Gibbs and Amon-Ra off the bye, the Lions at home. That's going to be a shootout. At least the Lions will put up a shit ton of points, and there's going to be a touchdown, 100 yards. JSN, I think, has earned must-start status, so I'm going to put him in this tier. I think he's a top 5 wide receiver, and then I would be ranking JaMarr Chase higher. However, there is a shot that Joe Flacco is inactive this week. Flacco has been questionable, and then they activated a practice squad quarterback up to the active roster. So Flacco's a game-time decision. There's a shot that that's not a concern, and JaMarr would be moving up the rankings. But if it's Jake Browning, the ceiling is capped. The value does go down with Jake Browning. The Bears matchup does not scare me, but the quarterback situation does. And for that reason, JaMarr Chase is at the bottom of this tier. But you're not benching any of these players. Don't get cute with anyone. Even like Bijan and CMC coming off some rough games, they're going to bounce back. Don't worry about Bijan and CMC. Taylor, I have at 1 because he feels like a lock for not just 1 but 2 touchdowns every game. So the top 10 are obvious. That tier is untouchable. And now we move down to the second tier where I think all these players are also in your lineup. I have the top 10 running backs, so 6 more at that position. And then overall the top 12 wide receivers. So 12 players in this tier, all of them are locks in your lineup. There is really no argument you can provide for me to bench them. Achane and Derrick Henry didn't score touchdowns, but had the yardage. They both had very productive games last night, and you don't regret starting them. Even without a touchdown, they were perfectly fine. So good games out of Achane and Henry. Not worried about it. Kyren Williams should dominate against the Saints. The Saints have been an average matchup this season, and Kyren Williams probably gets a ton of volume in the second half. This game profiles as a massive blowout in favor of the Rams, and they're just going to kill the clock in the second half. My only concern is if they hand it off to Blake Corum just to keep Kyren healthy, but given Corum has fumbled, Kyren's going to dominate. Kyren's going to be an awesome play this week. At number 13 overall, he's my running back 7. No doubt about it. You're starting Kyren Williams. Ladd McConkey, Nico Collins, and Davante Adams come in the next tier here with 3 wide receivers I have in the top 9. And with Ladd, he's the number 1 target for Justin Herbert. Over the last 4 games, he has 41 total targets. That leads the team, and despite Oronde Gadsden popping off lately, Ladd is still their number 1 go-to option. Against the Titans, he will have a great game. No chance you're benching Ladd McConkey. I would have ranked Nico Collins much lower. However, the Broncos are probably not going to have Pat Surtain this week. He is doubtful with an ankle injury. So that downgrade no longer applies. And last week, Nico missed time with a concussion. He practiced in full, cleared the protocol. He will suit up in this matchup. So I think he'll have a good game. I don't fear Riley Moss. And rookie first rounder Jahdae Barron has yet to prove himself, is ranked behind Riley on the depth chart. So maybe he steps up, but I don't see it coming. Nico Collins, fully rested, should have a great game. I'm 100% starting Nico with no Pat Surtain. Then I have Davante Adams, who's a lock in your lineup every single week. He's probably going to get another 10 targets alongside Puka, and a touchdown feels pretty much guaranteed as well. No chance you're benching Davante Adams. There's also no chance you're benching Javonte Williams, Josh Jacobs, or James Cook. The goal line production is on lock. And despite a really tough matchup for Cook, I still have him as my RB10. You can't convince me you're benching Cook in the marquee matchup of the week. It's probably a shootout. Maybe they hold him in check, but unless Ray Davis vultures him like twice, I feel like a touchdown's guaranteed for James Cook. Same with Josh Jacobs. Despite the injury, I'm not worried about Emmanuel Wilson. They might lean on him a little bit extra given they have an Eagles game after this, but I'm still locking Josh Jacobs into the lineup. A touchdown is a guarantee with Jacobs. And then Javonte feels like the same thing with Jacobs. They feel like they're on equal footing, and the Cardinals don't scare me. The Cowboys offense should be lights out in primetime. But speaking of that Cowboys game in primetime, Marvin Harrison Jr. gets the best matchup on the season. The Cowboys secondary is just so trash, and especially with Trevon Diggs going on IR, I don't see any reason to be fading Marvin Harrison. Maybe you're worried about the quarterback situation, but honestly, I've seen higher upside with Trey McBride when Brissett's been the starter, and we haven't gotten to see it with Harrison because he missed last time with a concussion, and then he also went down against the Colts early in that game. So I think he'll be good. It's mainly the matchup why I'm trusting him, but especially if it's Kyler, I would trust a touchdown and at least 10 targets against the Cowboys. An elite matchup, you have to start every wide receiver 1 against Dallas. I'm starting Justin Jefferson for sure, but downgrading him significantly with JJ McCarthy under center. You're obviously committed to Jefferson. You're not going to bench him. I still have him as the wide receiver 11 overall in my ranks, 21 in overall flex consideration, and that is definitely a lock in your lineup. I'm not telling you to bench him, but I am downgrading him outside the top 10 because I do not trust JJ McCarthy. The matchup, however, is good. You should expect good production against the Lions. Drake London, also in this tier. I cannot bench him, but the Christian Gonzalez matchup is difficult. And then last week, he was a surprise inactive late in the week. He was downgraded and didn't play. So that's a red flag. There's still a red flag regarding Penix's health, but I assume both will be healthy. If not against Christian Gonzalez, I would have ranked him at the top of this tier. I would have had him above Ladd McConkey had Christian Gonzalez not been his matchup. But I'm still not going to bench Drake London. Next up, now we're entering a little bit more of a discussion. These aren't automatic starts anymore, but overall, these next 14 players rank top 20 at wide receiver and top 16 at running back. I cannot think of an argument to fade them, and overall, there's a big argument to upgrade them, especially at running back. The top 2 players in this tier, I have Kyle Monangai and Kimani Vidal inside my top 12 at running back. I mentioned it when I broke down the matchups. These 2 players have the 2 best spots on the slate. Let's break down Cincinnati specifically. In the last 4 games, the Bengals defense has allowed 5.9 yards per carry for 141 rushing yards per game. They also give up 48 receiving yards per game, and that total of 189 yards from scrimmage to just the running back position is the most in the NFL on the year. Swift did not practice at all this week. He's been ruled out with a groin injury, and that locks in production for Kyle Monangai. This team has looked like a run-first offense since the bye week, and I absolutely trust Kyle Monangai. Every running back against the Bengals fucking torches them, and the touchdown feels guaranteed with no DeAndre Swift. I love Monangai. He's a must-start. I told you in an emergency video to pick him up, and hopefully you got him earlier in the week, and it's not a problem, but if he's still available, you got to scoop up Monangai and start him. He is a guaranteed option. I trust Monangai. I think you're getting at least 14 points, and if he scores a touchdown, I think 20 plus is legitimately there on the table for him. So love Monangai. He's my favorite option beyond the obvious top 10. But Kimani Vidal also gets an elite matchup. The Tennessee Titans have allowed 14 touchdowns to running backs this year. That is the most by far, and at least one in every single game. They also give up 5.1 yards per carry. And you know the Chargers are going to get out to a big lead and probably just kill the clock with rush attempts in the second half, like they did against the Vikings. So love Kimani Vidal. The volume will be there. The matchup is so good. A touchdown feels like a lock to bet on with Vidal. So those two, I have no argument to be made to bench them. I want them in my lineup no matter what. Do not bench them. I promise you they'll pay off. Then I have a tier of 4 wide receivers behind them. DK Metcalf versus the Colts gets an elite matchup. It ranks top 4 on the season. And generally, Metcalf does score touchdowns. He is the go-to target for Rodgers in the red zone. So this week, I would bet on that. The Colts give up 180 plus yards to the position. At worst, there's going to be a bunch of garbage time for DK to torch them. So I trust the yak. I like the volume here. I think Rodgers has to sling it like crazy, and Metcalf will be his go-to option. Start DK Metcalf for sure. I have him 13th at wide receiver and 25 overall. At 26, we got Pickens, who's always a lock in your lineup. He is the wide receiver 2, though, and the Cardinals have been a somewhat tough spot. So at wide receiver 14, I want him in the lineup, but perhaps this is not a week where he scores a touchdown. But in prime time, I'm definitely going to trust Dak Prescott. But right behind him, I think a lock for touchdowns in this game would be Michael Pittman Jr. versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. 6 touchdowns for Pittman in 8 games. He's going to Pittsburgh. Everything feels like a automatic touchdown is in store for Michael Pittman. So I trust him. At least 7 catches in each of the last 2 games as well. His work in the red zone this year has been so impressive. Did you see his one-handed catch? He is really impressive. I love this matchup for him. The Steelers secondary has been trash. Daniel Jones is going to feast. Start Michael Pittman. You're also starting Romeo Doubs no matter what, but given this matchup is so good for running backs and tight ends, I could see it maybe go away from him in terms of volume. He didn't practice on Wednesday, but then was full on Friday. Ben Johnson has been giving his playmakers a bit of extra rest early in the season. So I do trust him as long as he's active. You can't bench him, but Caleb has not been offering the highest touchdown production. And for that reason, I think every player I rank higher does have a higher chance of finding the end zone. But the yardage will be there. Odunze will go over double digits. Definitely inside my top 20 at wide receiver, inside my top 30 overall. At 29, we're pivoting back to running back with Travis Etienne at Las Vegas. And with no Travis Hunter, BTJ banged up, the odds that Etienne finds pay dirt are much higher. I think they're going to have to lean on him against Las Vegas. It could turn into a shootout. I like the over in this game quite a bit. So Etienne, their best playmaker, should get the volume. My RB 13, I would start him, but the upside I don't think is as high as Monangai or Kimani Vidal. Then after Etienne, I got another tier of 3 wide receivers, and I did tell you to start Jaylen Waddle last night. Didn't score a touchdown, but 80 plus yards. I did mention that in our higher lower projections, and that was one of the calls I got right on that 5-play pick'em on Underdog last night. So Waddle with good yardage, but no touchdown. A good floor game from him, though, very safe option. And I think the same type of projection is in store for Deebo Samuel. Maybe the Seahawks hold him out of the end zone, but with no Terry McLaurin, I trust the volume to go to him. Deebo feels like a lock in your lineup, especially with Jaden Daniels returning under center. Keenan Allen is always in your lineup as well, but last week we saw the risk in this offense. There's just too many mouths to feed, especially with Trey Harris and Oronde Gadsden starting to emerge, especially Gadsden, but it appears that Quentin Johnston is the only one that really misses out from the targets. So Keenan, still a lock in my lineup inside my top 20 receivers, but I've seen more production going to Ladd and Gadsden over the last 2 games. For that reason, he's only wide receiver 19, but that's still a player you're starting. Top 40 overall for sure in my lineup. Then a tier of 3 running backs with Tyrone Tracy, Bam Knight, and TreVeyon Henderson. With Tracy, he benefits from an injury to Cam Skattebo. And I really love this matchup for pass-catching running backs. The Niners give up 60 receiving yards per game to the position. We saw Woody Marks have some good value last week. I see a similar upside argument for Tyrone Tracy against San Francisco. Their defense is depleted. They're traveling to the East Coast in the morning. I think Tracy gets a lot of volume and will score a touchdown. In the passing game specifically, I think he'll give you at least four receptions. I like his PPR value a lot. My running back 14, I would be starting Tyrone Tracy this week against the Niners. I'm also going to start Bam Knight against the Cowboys. The Cowboys have started to get a little bit better on defense, but not by much. And especially against running backs, you can absolutely torch them. Bam Knight is the starter, and it looks like he's going to be the overwhelming RB1. I don't think they trust Emari Demercado at all anymore. And then they relegated Michael Carter to the practice squad after cutting him from the roster during the bye week. So Bam Knight gets the best matchup. Definitely a lot of volume. I would be worried that Kyler vultures him for a rushing touchdown, but odds are there's enough to go around. This matchup is so good, and he will get the start on Monday night. Start Bam Knight. I think he'll have 20 plus touches and at least 3 or 4 receptions. I think he'll find the end zone. But if he only gives you like 70 yards on those 20 touches, wouldn't shock me at all if it's even less than that. So hoping for a touchdown, but I think it clicks. The Cowboys matchup is why I'm trusting him. Then TreVeyon Henderson really benefits because Ramondre Stevenson has been ruled out. Antonio Gibson's been on IR. So this is the week we've finally been waiting for. The volume has to go to TreVeyon Henderson. But watch them give Terrell Jennings, that undrafted free agent, a bunch of touches as well. Watch him get vultured and Vrabel just say fuck you to the fantasy community. But I'm going to start TreVeyon Henderson at RB16. The argument is clearly there. He should be a safe play with no Ramondre Stevenson. The Falcons have also been a top 11 matchup on the season. And in the last 4 games specifically, they do rank top 7. They're allowing 27 points per game, and it is a significant upgrade for TreVeyon Henderson. So start him. I don't have the highest level of confidence, but there is really no argument I can find to fade him. Good matchup, good volume. TreVeyon should break out. Lastly, in this tier, though, I did tell you to start Zay Flowers, and the touchdown didn't find him, but he did give you 5 catches for 64 yards. All 5 targets were caught, and that's a floor that isn't exciting, but is not going to completely burn you at the position. He didn't live up to this ranking, but at wide receiver 20, his ceiling is so high, I think it was worth it. But he did not have a good matchup. Surprisingly, the Dolphins are not an easy spot for opposing receivers. So ranked him a bit too high, but don't regret it, to be honest with you. And now moving forward, we are talking about the top 48. The next 12 players include 5 running backs and 7 wide receivers. And overall, I would still be starting all these players. They rank in the top 50 overall. And in a typical 10-team league where you're starting 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and 1 flex, then these are the players that would be in your lineup. If you're in a 12-team league, then these are all of the starters overall at the position. So next 2 running backs, we have Zach Charbonnet and Ashton Genty, and I trust a touchdown will be there for both of them. Charbonnet has really emerged ahead of Kenneth Walker, but Walker's still factoring in and sometimes gets more volume, so you need the touchdown, but Charbonnet scored twice before the bye week last we saw him, and it was also Kenneth Walker's birthday. So if that's not an endorsement of Charbonnet, I don't know what is. It's an indictment of Kenneth Walker, that's for sure. So love Charbonnet. He's the RB1 in the Seattle backfield, and maybe off the bye, he starts to emerge with more volume. But Ashton Jeanty gets a very tough matchup. The Jags give up bottom 6 points to the position this year. However, Jeanty is usually getting so much volume that it kind of doesn't matter. There are some really gross options moving forward. So off the bye week, I think that this game has shootout potential, and I could see Jeanty play very well. At home, he has lived up to expectation. He has hit the ceiling, but the matchup is really the only downgrade. I think he'll still find the end zone, and that's why he's still in my top 40 overall. I would still start Jeanty, but he's a low-end RB2 because the matchup is pretty difficult. Then I have 2 Kansas City Chiefs at 39 and 40 overall. I have Xavier Worthy as my wide receiver 21 and Kareem Hunt at running back 19. I want to start both of them without Isaiah Pacheco. I really trust that the goal line production will be there for Kareem Hunt. The Bills matchup has been really good this season. They've allowed 9 rushing touchdowns in 7 games this year, and 5 of them have come in just the last 3 games. So I expect a touchdown here for Kareem Hunt. He's their goal line running back, and with no Pacheco, I don't think he'll only be used in short yardage situation. I still think Brashard Smith is going to be a big factor, but on the goal line, their go-to guy is Kareem Hunt, and I do expect him to score. It's usually a reliable bet to bet against Buffalo on the goal line. So love Kareem Hunt, but I think the upside is much higher for Xavier Worthy. If you told me Andy Reid has been saving one of those trick plays to Xavier Worthy for one game in particular, I think it would be this one. The Bills secondary doesn't really scare me too much, and Worthy is bound to have an explosion. I could envision right when everyone is expecting Rashee Rice to be the clear go-to guy for them to dial up a big game for Xavier Worthy. So this is a game I want a piece of. I love the upside, and I really like Worthy's value this week. I think he could have an 80-yard house call, and I literally think the upside is well over 25 points. If he drops 30, wouldn't shock me at Buffalo. So I'm expecting a shootout, want a piece of this game, love Worthy against the Bills. So those are my must starts in the top 40, but these next 8 players are still in this same tier, and the next 5 are wide receivers. We got WanDale Robinson versus San Francisco. Their defense has been really bad lately. In the last 4 games, the Niners rank as the 2nd best wide receiver matchup in fantasy, allowing 35 points per game on 203 yards per game and 5 wide receiver touchdowns in that span. So WanDale has very high upside this week. He is my preferred pass catcher in the Giants offense. And given Scadaboo is out, I think they play really well without him. And I expect a touchdown to go to WanDale Robinson. From a yardage standpoint, I think he also offers at least 75 yards. I think WanDale is a great play. So he's my wide receiver 22. I would be starting WanDale. And I'm also going to start Tet McMillan, who gets a sneaky good matchup against Green Bay. They've been getting much more vulnerable as of late. In their last 4 games, they've allowed the 4th most points per game to the position on 185 yards per game and also 5 touchdown receptions to receivers. So Tet is clearly the highest volume bet in Carolina. And while he looked a little bit better with Andy Dalton, I still think Bryce Young can get the job done. So I think there's a shot for a 100-yard game here. As long as it doesn't go to Leggett, I think the value against the Packers secondary is worth betting on. Tet is in my top 25 at the position. I would be starting him as a very reliable wide receiver 2. Chris Olave is still in the wide receiver 2 discussion, but it's a little harder to trust with Tyler Shuck under center. The Rams traded for a new cornerback, but I don't think it moves the needle that much. I still think it's a good matchup against the Rams in the secondary. So I would still start Olave. Even with Shuck, the volume will still be there, and perhaps he doesn't give you 90 plus yards like the last few weeks, but it's at least going back to his floor of 55. At the very least, you're going to get 8 points from Chris Olave. The volume will cover you. Then I have Juwan Jennings at the Giants. It has been a pretty good matchup this season. And since returning to the lineup, Juwan Jennings does have 7 targets in each of his last 2 games. That is much better than Kendrick Bourne in terms of volume. So I would rather go George Kittle, but the wide receiver 1 for the Niners should have a good game this week. The Giants defense shouldn't scare you. Then I have Kayshon Boutte versus the Falcons. And I used to rank Diggs as the top Patriots wide receiver, but Boutte has much higher upside. The touchdown feels much more likely for Boutte, and then he also has really good chemistry down the field. The Falcons will probably focus a bit more on Diggs and Hunter Henry. So I like Boutte. I think he's a top 30 wide receiver, a good option in week 9. Chase Brown and Jaylen Warren come in this tier as well. 2 running backs that I'm a little worried don't score a touchdown. With Chase Brown, I'm concerned that Flacco doesn't get the start. His production was not anywhere near the same with Browning as opposed to Flacco. But last week he had 2 touchdowns. He hadn't scored since week 1. If that can come back to him, then the ceiling will be there, and that's why I'm still going to rank him in the top 20. I think the floor is fine with Chase Brown, but because it's Browning, I'm not excited to fully trust him. The Bears matchup, though, has been top 10 this year, so on paper it's an upgrade, but on offense, I'm worried that Browning kind of craters everything, and Chase Brown just doesn't have the same ceiling anymore. So I'm still going to start him, but more of a floor play. We're definitely entering the flex discussion much more at this point, but at RB20, worth a start. I'd keep him in the lineup because the last 2 games have been much better. Jaylen Warren, I hate the matchup. It ranks bottom 7 against the Colts this week, and it's definitely really difficult overall. So it could be a rough game here. I don't expect a touchdown, but odds are there's garbage time, and odds are Rodgers has to check it down quite often. So start Jaylen Warren from a floor perspective. The volume should carry you, but if Kenny Gainwell vultures him or starts to really factor in on passing downs later in the game, I could see no floor at all for Jaylen Warren. They're starting to get some legitimate risk, but based on his production this year, I'd still keep Warren in the lineup. But the last player in this tier that I think you are still starting would be Brian Thomas Jr. at the Las Vegas Raiders, my wide receiver 27, and the last guy I'm projecting for more than 12 points. So Brian Thomas Jr. will get the bulk of targets. Travis Hunter went down. However, he's been practicing limited all week with a shoulder harness, and that's really a big red flag. I can't imagine he's 100%, and he's had the yips this year. I could see him kind of back away from the ball to avoid getting tackled. I don't like the vibes surrounding the Jags passing game entering this game. So I'm worried about BTJ. I could see Parker Washington vulture him as well, but with no Brenton Strange, the volume's just so locked in. That should carry you, but I am really worried about Brian Thomas Jr. moving forward. So let's hope for the best. As long as he's active, I would start him, but it does not feel like the safest bet. Moving forward, though, we're definitely talking about the best flex options, and perhaps you don't have the space anymore. Maybe your roster's pretty deep, but I like these options. They're all inside my top 28 at running back and 36 at wide receiver. So generally speaking, I still expect 10 points from them, but not more than 12. If you don't get the touchdown, you might get burned, but they all have a legitimate argument to get that touchdown. These next 4 players are all wide receivers. I like Josh Downs with some touchdown value. The Steelers matchup is just so good lately, and Daniel Jones is poised to have a great game throwing the ball. The Steelers are the second best matchup for quarterbacks, top 4 for receivers. Downs, even on limited volume, did score a touchdown. That's 2 in his last 2 games, and before the bye week, he had 16 catches on 20 targets in his previous 3 games. He only had 3 targets last week, but off the concussion, I would assume that doubles in this matchup, given Daniel Jones is going to throw the ball a lot more. The matchup's much better against the pass than the run. So love Josh Downs, very underrated, good floor play, and I think he does score a touchdown against the Steelers. At 50 overall, we have Courtland Sutton at Houston, and he's still in my top 30 receivers, so I'm still probably going to flex him, but against Derek Stingley and the Texans, it's the second toughest matchup this week, and I am definitely fading him. We saw him kind of shit the bed last week against Dallas, and perhaps Troy Franklin is emerging above him, but it's just this matchup. I still expect him to bounce back inevitably, but Derek Stingley is someone I really respect, and that's a shadow coverage I want to avoid. So a massive downgrade with no Surtain on the slate. I would argue that this Derek Stingley matchup for Sutton is the toughest shadow coverage you can find. Not ideal, but I'd still probably keep him in the lineup as a high-end flex play. Sutton probably still gets you 10 points. But Khalil Shakir is usually a lock for 9 points. The matchup against Trent McDuffie and the Chiefs is very difficult. So similar to Sutton, he gets a downgrade. But in the Bills-Chiefs shootout, I would expect a lot of points, and odds are he still puts up a good game. But he's more of a floor play in general. Safe option, but a bit of a downgrade given the Chiefs on paper are a very tough matchup. Then I have Stefon Diggs, who I think might be trickling back down the depth chart behind Kayshon Boutte. He's been a good teammate this year, so it's not been a problem. However, I do feel like there's much more upside with Boutte moving forward. The touchdowns just haven't really been there for Diggs. He had his first of the season just last week, and the volume wasn't really good otherwise. The touchdown kind of salvaged a really rough game. So I see much more value for Boutte right now. So given I prefer him, I did rank Boutte higher, but the floor has been pretty good for Diggs. The volume's still been solid, and the yardage is usually good for roughly 50 yards. So I still have him as a good flex play, but if you have both Boutte and Diggs, straight up, I'd rather go with Kayshon instead of Stefon. And all three of them should have good yardage, but are very touchdown dependent, and I'm also not convinced it happens in some somewhat difficult matchups. But the talent is definitely there with these three players. I have Dave Montgomery, Kenneth Walker, and J.K. Dobbins in this little tier here. But Montgomery is not giving you 10 plus points without the touchdown. Without it, you're kind of getting screwed. So maybe you're fine with 8 points. That's what Flowers provided, but it's a little disappointing when it happens. And against the Vikings, it's been a somewhat difficult matchup, bottom 10 this year. And for that reason, I will fade Montgomery just a little bit. Outside the top 20, he's more of a flex play than a must start. But the Lions offense usually plays very well at home. It could be a great game. I don't want to fully fade him, but with no touchdown, you will get burned. He's just a flex play. Let's not pretend. He's been safe every single week. And same goes for Kenneth Walker. Even if he has more touches than Charbonnet, I do not trust a touchdown for him. Last time he scored, he had 2 touchdowns, but that was 5 weeks ago, and Charbonnet was inactive. So I don't trust Walker to score a touchdown. On his birthday, Charbs had 2 of them, and that's a big indictment on the goal line usage for Walker. So unless he has a house call, I just don't see him getting the touches near the goal line. It's Charbonnet's job, and off the bye, it might even further favor Zach Charbonnet. So no thanks on Kenneth Walker in terms of upside, but from a floor perspective, he still probably gets you 80 yards. And maybe this is the week where that touchdown does finally click. It's prime time. Maybe, just maybe, it happens. But I doubt it. There is some risk here. In the flex conversation, though, he's really talented. I'd still probably keep him in the lineup. But Dobbins gets a really tough matchup against the Texans, and I'm also not convinced that RJ Harvey is going to step aside like he was earlier in the year. I could see Harvey, the second round pick, really emerge as the guy you want above Dobbins. But at the moment, I still think Dobbins is the lead guy, and in general, Harvey has only emerged in like really easy matchups. Given it's much tougher, I could see Dobbins still be the guy they lean on. However, if you're not scoring a touchdown against Houston, it's been brutal. The Texans only give up 3.7 yards per carry. However, they also have allowed 7 rushing touchdowns in 7 games to the running back position. So as long as that touchdown does save you, I think you'll be fine. But if you told me it went to Harvey, I wouldn't be shocked. There is some bust potential here for Dobbins, but I think he's still my preferred option in the Broncos backfield. I hope it works out, but he might be fading pretty quickly if Harvey is legit. These next 2 players are wide receivers, and they're pretty touchdown dependent. I'm a bit worried given the matchups and circumstances, because Romeo Doubs, I think, is still the top receiver, going to run the most routes in Green Bay, but it's a crowded offense, and the Panthers matchup is tough. J.C. Horn is a corner I'd like to avoid, and Dobbs might get vultured by Christian Watson or Matthew Golden pretty easily. Kraft is the play for sure, so Dobbs is just a flex option. He's still the guy I'd want in Green Bay, but not by a mile. Not my favorite option, but a decent floor play at flex. T. Higgins loses a lot of value if Flacco is not the starter. And even last week, without the touchdown, T. Higgins would have burned you pretty bad. So if Browning returns, then no thanks at all. I'd drop him down much further than this. However, at the moment, it's still a possibility that Flacco's the guy. But they upgraded a quarterback from the practice squad. The writing is on the wall. It looks like Browning will probably get the start on Sunday. So that's not good. But then these next 3 players also a bit risky. I have Tyjae Spears, who did kind of break out last week, but the volume is still 50-50 with Pollard. So you need to get lucky on the goal line. But I think in terms of explosiveness, I'd rather have Tyjae than Tony Pollard. My RB25 is a solid flex play. If you need him, go ahead. But I think the upside's a bit capped. Without the touchdown, I wouldn't project more than 10 points. RJ Harvey could be the guy you want instead of J.K. Dobbins. So I only have him 2 spots at the position behind Dobbins, but at RB26, there is still some risk with Harvey. I could see it blow up in your face. I don't feel super confident just yet with RJ Harvey. If he doesn't have an elite game, then he doesn't give you more than like 8 points, and it's a bit boom bust. And the 2 games he has popped off have been elite matchups against Cincinnati and Dallas. That ranks top 3. Against Houston, it's bottom 10. I could definitely see it blow up in your face if you're chasing the points on RJ Harvey. I could also see it blow up in your face if you're chasing the points with Rico Dowdle. It hasn't been the same the last 2 weeks now that Chuba Hubbard's back. But against Green Bay, it's really a tough matchup. The Packers are bottom 3 on the season, and I just don't see much efficiency in this spot. So I like it better for receivers against the Packers, but if you told me one player for Carolina has a house call, it's definitely going to be Rico Dowdle. He's still super explosive, so you're just hoping for the best, but at RB27, player 60 overall, he is in the flex conversation. I could do much worse than Rico Dowdle in the lineup. But these next 2 are wide receivers. DJ Moore and Keon Coleman have very low floors, and without a touchdown, I wouldn't really trust DJ Moore very much. But with the injury to DeAndre Swift, the odds of that happening do increase, and perhaps he lucks out. The Bengals defense is pretty bad in general, but it's a much better matchup for running backs and tight ends, so perhaps he only gives you that 6-point floor like he's had consistently this year. With no touchdown, DJ Moore has been pretty brutal this season. And then Keon Coleman in potentially a massive shootout does have upside, but has had no floor this year. Other than week 1, he's been a major liability. So I have him in the same tier as Khalil Shakir, but at the position of wide receiver, 6 spots behind him, and then overall 11 spots behind Khalil Shakir in the flex ranking. So not the same proposition, but if you told me that Josh Allen goes nuclear, plays Superman, and has a ton of touchdowns in this game, I could see 1, if not 2, go to Keon Coleman, especially if the Chiefs defense doesn't show up. So like his upside, hate his floor, but a legit flex play given the circumstances in this Chiefs-Bills game, it's likely going to be a high shootout. And that's why Brashard Smith closes out this tier as well. I'd much rather go Kareem Hunt. I trust a touchdown for Kareem way, way more. I have Kareem Hunt in the top 20 at the running back position, but I still think Brashard Smith has legit flex play appeal this week. At RB 28, 63 overall, I would expect good volume with no Pacheco. It's been a committee all season. Kareem Hunt is mainly a short yardage goal line option, and that will bode well for Brashard Smith's volume in this game. I would expect at least 12 rush attempts and also at least 3, if not 5 targets. He has good PPR value. I think the floor is very high, but I expect him to get vultured by Kareem Hunt. I don't feel like a touchdown is the safest bet here. If it happens, you'll be ecstatic. He'll be a top 20 play at the position, but without it, you'll probably only get about 8-10 points, and that's fine, but it's just not going to win you your week, most likely. So if you're desperate off the waiver wire, go ahead and pick him up. If you have to replace Ramondre or Pacheco or DeAndre Swift and you did not get Kyle Monangai, grab Brashard Smith, a very safe floor play against the Bills in a top 5 matchup. The stats indicate that Brashard Smith should have a safe outcome in fantasy this week. So that's it for all the players I am confidently starting. Behind the black line are my bench candidates. And at 64 overall, I'm now much more pessimistic about all these players. So in general, just understand I'd rather bench them, but obviously they still have value and they still have a chance to pop off. These next 15 players are the guys I'm most confident in betting in. If I didn't get my ideal flex candidates, these are the low end options that still probably offer about 7 or 8.5 fantasy points in half PPR. We have Chuba Hubbard at Green Bay. The matchup is terrible, but still getting more volume than Dowdle. So if he was more explosive, I'd rank him higher. But in general, you're just hoping for a touchdown, and the Packers are not a good spot. So I'd bet against it. I'd rather bench him. And then the Broncos matchup is much more difficult for Woody Marks against Denver. So last week, he did have some good upside catching passes. The Broncos not the same equation, and I just don't really want to trust him. With Nico Collins and Christian Kirk getting healthy, I'd rather pass on Woody Marks. But maybe you're desperate enough. Maybe the value is appealing. He's still an RB1, but in Houston, behind that O-line against the Broncos, I'm not excited to trust him. Then these next 5 have elite upside, but no floor at all. These wide receivers, I think, are major bust candidates, in my opinion. But Jordan Addison is very tempting. The matchup against Detroit is really, really good on paper. But I don't trust J.J. McCarthy, so I'd rather just fade Addison. I'll take my lumps and trust Justin Jefferson. But given I've never seen McCarthy play with Addison However, he was suspended when McCarthy was active earlier this year. I would rather fade him. The matchup's good, but it just doesn't feel safe enough given McCarthy has not been a consistent enough quarterback this year. But he is playing in Michigan. Maybe he gets motivated in division. He'll have to step up, but I could see Detroit really play well and shut him down. McCarthy, I just don't trust enough to endorse Jordan Addison. But if he plays as well as he was with Carson Wentz, then I'm ranking him way too low. The upside is elite for Addison, but the floor, I think, is non-existent. With Parker Washington, I think it's the same type of argument. With no Travis Hunter, someone steps up, and given Brian Thomas Jr. is banged up, I think Parker Washington is the guy. His role in the red zone this year has been valuable, and if I was going to expect a touchdown to go somewhere other than Travis Etienne or Brian Thomas Jr., I would expect Parker Washington to get that end zone target. So does have upside, but no real floor. If you told me Trevor Lawrence doesn't play well at all, that wouldn't shock me either. So not expecting more than like 40 yards from Washington, but a touchdown I think is a decent bet. I would say 2-1 odds that Parker Washington finds the end zone. At 68 overall, wide receiver 39, I have Troy Franklin at Houston. And last week was amazing, but the Cowboys matchup way easier than the Texans matchup. So at least he's not getting Derek Stingley, but I still don't fully trust him. Marvin Mims is out with a concussion, so if Franklin really pops off, then I'll stop hating on him. But I just don't like this matchup. It ranks bottom 3 on the season, and I don't expect a touchdown to go to Franklin. So just a floor play with a lot of risk. The Texans could definitely shut him down. I'd rather go Parker Washington off the waiver wire, but these next two are hyper boom bust. Last time we saw both of them, they gave you a bagel, and I really can't envision starting Jameson Williams or Quentin Johnston with confidence. At least with JMO, there's more targets that should go in his direction. There's less competition, but for whatever reason, he's just not as consistent this year. And I could see Isaac Tesla off the bye start to emerge a little bit more. So I'll pass on JMO if I can, but you could get 20 points any game with Jameson Williams. Last time, though, we saw a bagel, and I'd rather just avoid it. That feels too risky. Same with Quentin Johnston, had a bagel in his last game last week. With Oronde Gadsden popping off and him fumbling a few weeks ago, I just don't see it. I think Herbert is fed up. I think they've moved off of him. Trey Harris got more targets than QJ last week. So still some upside, but I'd rather fade him. I'm not going to rank Trey Harris above him, but I'd probably rather go Oronde Gadsden than Quentin Johnston. These next 4 players are all running backs, and I see very capped upside. The floor might be okay in terms of volume, but I just really would rather fade them overall. Tony Pollard, I think, is less interesting than Tyjae Spears, and while the volume's kind of 50-50, this Chargers matchup fluctuates from great to terrible, and last week they really shut down the Vikings. I could see them shut down the Titans yet again. So I'll fade him. If I'm going to bet on one, give me Tyjae, and I'd rather just go Brashard Smith off the waiver wire. So I'll fade Tony Pollard, but still could get you about 7 points just off of yardage. He'll still probably get about 13 rush attempts, most likely. But Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason get a terrible matchup. The Lions rank bottom 5 on the season, and they've given up so few touchdowns. That's the only path for success. Maybe McCarthy gets protected and hands it off like crazy, but I just only see touchdown upside, and I wouldn't bet on it with either Vikings running backs. They looked like shit against the Chargers in what I thought was an elite matchup. So not going to trust him in a terrible spot against Detroit. That's for sure. Definitely benching both Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, but I'd rather go Jones because he catches passes, and I think that offers a bit more upside. In catch-up mode against the Lions, they probably are trailing pretty big. Next at running back is JCM, who's losing a lot of value in this committee. It's just too frustrating, and the Seattle matchup is brutal. They give up very few yards per carry. The only way you can exploit them is if you catch passes, and last week that heavily favored Jeremy McNichols. So I would still rather roster Bill among the Commander's backfield, but he's losing a lot of value, a lot of upside. I don't trust his floor anymore. I would rather bench JCM if I can, but these next 3 players are very risky, but could play well. Jacoby Myers has been really bad, but has been banged up. Maybe he gets better off the bye, but with Bowers coming back, I'd rather just go Trey Tucker. I don't feel confident in any Raiders wide receiver. Geno Smith is just not a safe bet in general, but Alec Pierce is a great deep threat. The volume is just a bit tricky. He does have 67 plus yards in 4 of his last 5 games, but the volume is sometimes capped, and he is the third option. He's really underrated. I would roster him, but it's kind of hard to start him if Josh Downs is healthy. So not a bad option, but a low-end flex play. I would more likely bench Alec Pierce, but a good player to stash on your bench. Chimera DK had 8 targets last week, but the Chargers matchup is nowhere near as easy as the Colts matchup. The volume has only been productive when it goes to DK. Van Jefferson saw the same target share, but did nothing with it. And then Amon-Ra does do something at least, but nowhere near as productive as Chimera. So he's the guy I want in Tennessee. With the trade deadline looming, they might move off of Ridley, but even if Ridley comes back, I think DK has the most value among those pass catchers. So an interesting pickup, but not safe enough to start yet. The Chargers is a tough matchup. And then last 2 players in this tier are running backs that I would definitely much rather bench, but could have some value. We have Alvin Kamara as the last starter worth ranking, but the Rams matchup is bottom 2, so no thanks at all. The only running back to score a touchdown on the Rams is Christian McCaffrey. Otherwise, in 7 games, no other running back has found pay dirt. No chance I'm starting Kamara at the Rams. But Emmanuel Wilson probably continues to get volume. Jacobs is not 100%, and they probably want to keep him healthy for the Eagles game the next week. They probably beat Carolina pretty easily. That's what Vegas predicts. So Emmanuel Wilson probably gets double-digit touches for the second week in a row, but not excited to trust him. Just a handcuff option. Got to be desperate. I'd much rather go Brashard Smith off the waiver wire. So this next tier, players 80 through 93 are really desperation options, but I could talk myself into it if I needed to. We have Kendrick Bourne, who is better with Mac Jones, who will get the start, but the Giants matchup is the only upside. Now that Kittle's back, it's not going to be good. The last 2 weeks with Juwan Jennings also active, Kendrick Bourne is only averaging 3 targets. It's pretty brutal, but the Giants matchup is the only saving grace. It's positive, but I just don't trust the volume enough. Then Malik Washington, I was hoping for a touchdown, but did only rank him as wide receiver 46 last night. I think he's an interesting floor play moving forward, but rarely will he score, and that's going to be rough in fantasy. De'Ami Brown could have upside, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. is ruled out, but I expect BTJ to play, and my preference would be Parker Washington for some touchdown upside behind Travis Hunter. But he does run routes. He is a deep threat, could have some value against the Raiders. Their defense doesn't scare you. Christian Watson does have some appeal, but coming off the injury, they might scale his workload back. They want him healthy for sure in the Eagles game. The Panthers are also a tough matchup on paper. With Hollywood Brown, it's a big gamble. It's kind of a slot machine if you're not starting Rashee Rice or Kelsey in Kansas City. You really have no idea what to expect, but you could hit the jackpot. You could get a bagel. If he has 2 touchdowns, you'll be happy, but even with 1 touchdown, you might get less than 10 points, and it might not be worth it. Rashid Shaheed, a deep threat waiting to happen, but without it, only like 6 points most weeks. So with Tyler Shuck, I'm going to pass on Shaheed this week at wide receiver 50. Doesn't feel worth it. And then Leggett gets a great matchup on paper, actually, but I really don't know what to expect. I don't know if 2 weeks ago when he had 100 plus yards was legit or not. He could really pop off. He could also do nothing. If not for the matchup, I'd have no interest at all, but I could see some underrated DFS value here for Leggett. He's definitely not going to be rostered very much, in the matchup is pretty good. The Packers have given up 185 yards per game to receivers over the last 4 games. The value is there, but it probably feels better to bet on Tet McMillan. Darius Slayton also gets an elite matchup against the Niners. They've given up 200 yards per game in the last month, so the deep shot might be there. With no Cam Scatterbo, I do think Jackson Dart will take his shots downfield, but without the house call, you'll get screwed, so no thanks. And then these next 6 running backs I also think have some appeal, but odds are I'd still rather go with a wide receiver. I even rank behind them, but let's give you the ranks at running back. We have Ray Davis in this shootout. Maybe he vultures James Cook, but I doubt it. Kenny Gainwell might get some garbage time receptions against the Colts. They probably trail big time. The Seahawks are a good matchup for pass catching running backs. Otherwise, they're very difficult. So last week, McNichols had 5 catches. Perhaps he's interesting. I rank him top 40 at the running back position. Algier sometimes scores a touchdown on his volume. Sometimes it factors in, but the Patriots are a really tough matchup. I'd rather bet against it. And then Nick Chubb could also vulture a touchdown, but that's the only path for success. I only trust Woody. It's a tough matchup against Denver, so no thank you at all. And then Singletary might step up behind Scatterbo, but I'd much rather go Tyrone Tracy for sure. These last 7 players, though, are all wide receivers, and if you're just hoping for a house call touchdown, they do have some value. You could roster them if you're just stashing for the sake of depth. I got Torrey Horton, who gets more appealing now that Cooper Kupp is likely going to miss this game with a hamstring injury. At least he's questionable a game-time decision. I don't feel good about Cooper Kupp given his injury history. Zay Jones has good chemistry with Brissett, and against Dallas, it's an elite matchup, so don't dismiss him, but I'm only trusting Marvin Harrison Jr. If Kyler's the quarterback, then no thank you with Zay Jones at all. Amon-Ra gets volume, but doesn't do much with it. I'd much rather go Chimeri DK, but they are on equal footing in terms of volume lately. Rashad Bateman did score a touchdown, and that represents the upside of this tier. Without it, you'll get screwed, but with it, you might still only get like 8 points. And then Matthew Golden, I think, has fallen behind Christian Watson, so no thanks with him in a bad matchup. Darnell Mooney completely shit the bed, hoping for upside with no Drake London. That was a bummer. And then Jalen Coker gets a great matchup, but I'd rather go Leggett if I was going to bet against Tet McMillan in the Panthers offense. But then number 60 in my ranks overall is Calvin Austin, and perhaps he does emerge above Roman Wilson. The matchup is great, but last week Roman Wilson was the more appealing option. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I think I'd still prefer Calvin Austin, but not by a mile. We'll see what happens, but it feels very risky. Last player at 102 is Christian Kirk of Houston. Will come back to the field. He's been out for a few weeks with a hamstring injury. He will be active against Denver. So those are my flex rankings. So in totality, here they are on the screen. The top 102 running back and wide receiver in the flex rankings. So if you want to make your decisions based on just flex plays, I'll leave this up for a few more seconds. You can pause it and make your lineup decisions. But now I also want to show you individually the rankings at just the 2 positions. My top 42 running backs and top 60 wide receivers. Every single call I would make at each position. So I'm trusting the top 21 running backs up through Jaylen Warren. I would definitely start them. I think they're the better options in your lineup. And I feel amazing about the top 16. Players like Kyle Monungai, Kimani Vidal, Tyrone Tracy, Bam Knight, TreVeyon Henderson, and Travis Etienne in this tier as well are going to have really, really high outcomes. Love their touchdown upside. The matchups are phenomenal, and the volume should be fantastic. There is very little competition behind them in these backfields. So injuries are really benefiting all of this tier, and then ETN also factors in as well. But those are my favorite plays. And then at wide receiver, I think up through Brian Thomas, I also feel really confident. He's a bit risky, but still the value proposition based on talent feels worth it. And then especially in the top 20, there's no way I'm benching players like DK Metcalf in a great matchup. Pickens, Michael Pittman, touchdown feels like a lock. Odunze, always valuable. Waddle had good yards. Debo, with no Terry, feels like a must start. Keenan, always a must start. Flowers was fine, but not amazing. And then I love the upside for guys like Worthy, WanDale, Tet McMillan in a good matchup as well. Olave still probably gets high volume. Juwan Jennings as well. Kayshon Boutte has been amazing down the field, so want to start him. And then BTJ as long as he's active. Can't feel like you want to bench him. But Dave Montgomery through Brashard Smith are my preferred flex plays. The touchdown might not be there, but you'll still probably get about 8 to 10 points with all of them. And then Josh Downs through Keon Coleman have very high upside if the touchdown does hit, but also probably get you about 8 or so points based on yardage alone. But there is some risk with some of them, like guys like T. Higgins without Joe Flacco, Keon Coleman, always a very risky play. And then Rico Dowdle could get snuffed out by the Packers. Same with RJ Harvey against Houston. I'd be worried a little bit without a touchdown from guys like Dobbins and David Montgomery as well. So it gets pretty brutal behind Chuba Hubbard and Jordan Addison. I'd rather be benching everyone, but maybe you're desperate. Maybe you'll settle for the top 36 running backs or the top 44 wide receivers. But I mentioned every position. The video is long enough. If you still have questions, let me know down below. And then tomorrow I'll be updating every ranking with the injury report. So stay tuned for that. I'm excited for this weekend. I think we're gonna have some really, really high upside for some running backs we're usually not accustomed to starting. Off the waiver wire, you might get a win with some of your pickups. So good luck. I'll see you next time. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.